Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today we're headed back to the 1960s to take a look at one of the smallest full-frame 35mm cameras of all time, the Raleigh 35. So stick around. Before we dive into the Raleigh 35, I want to direct your attention to this episode's featured photo, also shot with a Raleigh, but not a Raleigh 35. This photo of Catawba Falls in Old Fort, North Carolina comes to us from Christopher Stinson and was shot with a Raleigh Flex 3.5. Very nice photo, and I love all that detail. You know, the last couple of videos I was away from my normal studio and didn't have the featured photos, and a lot of y'all were like, hey, where'd the community photos go? Well, don't worry, they're still here, but I think it's pretty cool that you'll miss it when it's not here. And if you have one that you'd like to send in, just shoot me an email at the address below. Simple as that. Now, back to this Raleigh. Most of us are quite familiar with the name Raleigh. There's probably not a more famous series of twin-lens reflex cameras than the Rolleiflex. The heritage of those cameras goes all the way back to the late 1920s, and by the 1960s, Rolleiflex TLRs could be found in nearly every newspaper office, supplanting the 4x5 press camera as the standard tool for photojournalists. Those are great cameras, and definitely worth the fame and upscale prices that they still command in the marketplace. But Raleigh was sort of late getting into the 35mm game. It wasn't until the early 60s that they decided to take a stab at designing a 35mm camera. And if they were going to do it, I guess they decided to do it in full Raleigh fashion and make it different from everything else on the market. One of the photographic fads of the time was half-frame cameras. Now maybe fad isn't the right word for it, but it was a very popular format and half-frame cameras were selling really well. These cameras would shoot only half of the standard 35mm frame and could therefore be smaller in size than full-frame 35s. But what Raleigh wanted to do was build a full-frame camera that would rival the size of a half-frame camera, something you could easily slip into your pocket. And in 1966, they released the Raleigh 35. This camera was claimed to be the smallest full-frame 35mm precision camera at the time. Raleigh used that word precision in its advertising because it meant that this was no cheapo plastic toy. This was a real camera made out of metal with a fantastic Zeiss Tessar lens, capable of achieving results that you'd expect from a camera with Raleigh on the nameplate. And if I'm not mistaken, it did indeed hold the title of smallest full-frame 35mm until 1996 when the Minolta TC1 hit the market. That's 30 years. And how did they manage to hold on to that for so long? Well, I think it boils down to one thing: unconventional design. The lens is retractable, the shutter and aperture control dials are mounted on the front side, and the rewind crank and hot shoe are on the bottom. And Raleigh made the interesting decision of not making it an SLR that would need a pentaprism. They didn't even make it a rangefinder. They made it a viewfinder camera that uses zone focusing. This viewfinder here only helps you frame the shot. That is it. Now I've got a confession to make. I don't use the technique of zone focusing very often. The kinds of subjects I usually shoot don't really require it, and the cameras I usually use don't require it either. I received this camera from a friend several years back, and as soon as I discovered it used zone focusing, I put it in a box of miscellaneous cameras that I thought maybe I'd get around to shooting someday. It wasn't going to be a priority regardless of the Raleigh name. Fast forward to last month when I eventually get off my high horse and I'm visiting my friend Russ up in Virginia, and we're filming a couple of episodes, one being my last one on the 35mm compact cameras, and the Raleigh 35 is on that list and has pretty good specs. And he was like, you really need to shoot one of these if you haven't ever done so. Now, Russ is a smart guy who definitely knows his way around a camera. A lot smarter than me. So I figured that, yeah, maybe I should. So I did. And you know what? I liked it. And using zone focusing wasn't as problematic as I thought it would be. So while it was all fresh in my head, I decided to do a quick video explaining how to do that. And I'll link to that video at the end of this one. So be sure to check that out if you want to learn more about zone focusing. But let's get back to the Raleigh and talk about all the variations you'll likely encounter if you're looking to pick one of these up. From 1966 to 1971, the camera was made in Germany, and it sported a Carl Zeiss 40mm 3.5 Tessar lens. Sometime in 1971, production shifted to Singapore, where these cameras would be manufactured for the next 10 years. And of these early Singapore models, you could find the standard 40mm 3.5 Zeiss Tessar or a Schneider S Xenar. In 1969, while still in Germany, there were also two budget models released, the B35 and the C35. These had simplified controls, a new shutter design, more plastic parts, and a more budget-oriented 40mm 3.5 Zeiss Triotar. Of these two, the C35 didn't even have a meter, and it was relatively short-lived, going out of production in 1971. However, the B35 stayed in production after the shift to Singapore, though they changed the name to 35B, and it remained in production until 1978. In 1974, a few new models were released. One included a more upscale 40mm 2.8 Zeiss sonar. This was named the Raleigh 35S, where S refers to sonar. At the same time, they renamed the standard Tessar version the Raleigh 35T, where the T refers to Tessar. Other than adding the T to the name, this version is still the same as the original, and both of these cameras were produced up until 1980. Also in 1974, the 35TE was released. It used the standard Tessar lens, but added exposure LEDs in the viewfinder. This model was also produced until 1980. In 1978, a new budget model was released, the 35 LED. It used a silicon light meter and had the LED exposure info in the finder, but it still sported the lesser Zeiss Triotar lens. It was produced until 1980. In 1979, the 35S was finally updated to the 35SE, which, like the TE, also included exposure LEDs in the viewfinder. It was produced through 1981. And here we have a bit of a hiccup in the timeline. Financial problems in the company were mounting beginning in the mid-70s, and by 1981, Raleigh was in bankruptcy. In 1982, they emerged from bankruptcy as three separate companies. This saw production shift back to Germany, and in 1986, the Raleigh 35 Platin Special Edition was released. This camera was similar to the 35S, but only 444 were made, and these were sold exclusively in Germany. So good luck finding one of those that you can afford. But at this point, the organization of the company, more bankruptcies and insolvencies, new owners, etc. gets complicated. The important thing is that in 1990, the Raleigh 35 Classic was released. It was very similar to the 35S with some minor improvements that included a hot shoe on top of the camera. And this camera was available through order until 2014. 48 years is a pretty good run for a camera series, I'd say. Now, with all that history out of the way, let's look at the camera. I have the 35TE and SE here, and apart from the lenses, they operate the same. The first thing to do is extend the lens. It just pulls straight out and locks with a slight clockwise turn. To collapse the lens, the shutter has to be cocked. So you'll need to make sure the film is wound to the next frame, which also charges the shutter. If the shutter isn't cocked, the lens won't move, and you may be tempted to force it. This is a bad idea and could lead to sadness. But once the shutter is cocked, move the lens lock lever down and turn the lens counterclockwise. It will turn easy, and at that point you can collapse the lens back into the body. When the lens is collapsed, the shutter will not fire. This is normal. Now, the dial underneath the Raleigh badge has two functions. The front-facing portion is where you'll set your film speed. The ASA or ISO range is from 25 to 1600. It's also marked in DIN from 15 to 33 if you prefer those numbers. Around the edge of the dial, though, is where you'll set your aperture. Just align it with the arrow just above the dial. On the dial underneath the viewfinder window is where you'll choose your shutter speed. Those speeds are marked along the edge of the dial, just like the f-stops were. And the range is from 2 seconds to 1/500th of a second plus B. The front portion of the dial just serves as a reminder of what type of film you're using. On the top of the camera, you have the shutter release over on the right and the wind lever over on the left. The battery compartment for the meter is also here. Slide the button on the back to the right to release it. The called for battery in the SE and TE models is a 5.6 volt mercury cell, of course. But the battery I'm using is an S27PX 6 volt silver oxide. The circuitry of the SE and TE models allows the slight extra voltage without negatively affecting the meter, so that's good. But if you have the original Model 35 or the T or S versions, the battery is going to be different. Those require 1.3 volts and the circuits won't function properly with a standard 1.5 volt. I don't know how far the meter would be off with a 1.5 volt battery or if it would even work at all. But if I had the T or S model, I'd certainly try it and see. But the best solution is to use an MR9 battery adapter with a 76px or equivalent cell. It's always something with the batteries. Of course, you can use an external meter, which is what I've used with these cameras since the meters aren't working properly anyway. But the meter is bigger than the camera, and it kind of defeats the purpose of the smallness, but it is what it is. On the bottom of the camera, we have the hot shoe, back release lever, and tripod socket. The little window in the frame of the tripod socket is the frame counter, and next to that is the fold out rewind crank. To rewind the film, flip the lever next to the viewfinder window up, and then you can rewind. Opening the film back is simple. Just move the lever and pull down. And the first thing you'll probably notice is that the film pressure plate isn't attached to the back. It's hinged and attached to the film gate. On these cameras, the film runs right to left. So you'll insert your cartridge, run the leader over to the take-up spool, insert it in the direction of the arrows, give a slight wind to make sure it catches, close the pressure plate, slide the back on, and close the latch. Fire the shutter and wind a few times and you'll be at frame number 1. So let's take it out for a shoot. This afternoon I am in Douglasville, Georgia with the Rollei 35 SE camera. So it's one of those really small, those compact 35s I talked about in that other video. This camera is unique in that, well, one thing, it's a Rollei 35. It's fairly famous because it's just so tiny. There is one main drawback to a camera this small, is that it has no rangefinder nor pentaprism. So focusing is by zone, which means you've got to use the distance scale on the lens plus your aperture to achieve a zone of focus instead of a sharp pinpoint focus on whatever it is you're shooting. So because of that, I'm shooting ISO 400 film because that's going to give me a deeper depth of field to sort of counteract or sort of hedge my bets on me guessing the distance. All right, so let's give it our best shot and see what we can find to shoot. I think I am about 12 feet from this. That's a guess, 12 feet. So let's see what my aperture is going to be. 1/250th of a second at f/16. All right, that's good. Let's do that. 1/250th of a second. All right, at f/16. Now, so I'm going to use my depth of field scale. Like I said, it was about 12 feet. So I'm going to use my depth of field scale, set infinity at one side of that, and that's going to give me anywhere from 6 feet to infinity in focus. Let's give it a shot. All right, that's a one down. We'll move in. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Just a little closer, maybe. No, let's go around front just a little bit. Same shot, though. So for this shot, I'm shooting down just a little bit, down the alleyway. I'm gonna get a vertical and a horizontal out of this. All right, so let's take a meter reading. 1/250th of a second at f/16, good. We'll leave that the same. All right, and I am still about 12, 15 feet away from this, I do believe. All right, so I'm gonna set my distance scale, set the lens, 1/250th at f/16. All right, let's get a couple of shots here. All right, before we move on from this spot, I want to get a shot right through here. Just straight onto this table with a chessboard, or checkers, depending on which pieces you bring. All right.
I'm thinking I'm about 10 feet away from here, but let's see. I'm gonna have to back up probably to here. All right, so I'm gonna say 10 feet. Yeah, I'm still 10 feet. Let's do, so I'm showing 1/500th of a second at f/16. So that's plenty of light. 1/500th of a second is the fastest shutter speed on this camera because it is a leaf shutter camera. All right, 1/500 at f/16. What did I say? I was at about 10 feet. 10 feet. All right, so f/16. So if I set the infinity at f/16, it's giving me anywhere from between 8 feet to infinity in focus. And interestingly enough, the meter has decided to work all of a sudden. Okay, so that's interesting. So let's talk about that. So the metering in this one is you've got 3 LED lights at the side of the viewfinder. One at the top is red, one in the middle is green, one at the bottom is red. When the middle green one is lit, that means the exposure is good based on the internal meter. And having that on, having that show as green there showed that I had my exposure about right in the first place. So this shot's going to require a little bit more studying, I suppose, because I've got some of the area, some of the subject is in shade under these trees. So I took a meter reading of that. It's at f8.5. So then I took another meter reading in the bright area. Now this is an incident meter, so I didn't use a spot meter. I just went up there and did the and metered it. So what I'm going to do is split that difference. So whatever's in the middle, that's the aperture I'm going to use, which is going to be about f11.5, right? At 1/60th of a second. So as far as, I'm not focusing very close up here. So I would say my first subject is about 15, 16, maybe 20 feet away, and I'm at 11. So at f11, I've got anywhere from about 12, 13 feet. Now I gotta wait for the sun to come out. There's a lot of figuring when it comes to these old cameras sometimes. And I think we get spoiled by just being able to pick up the camera, shoot something in aperture priority or shutter priority, it focuses automatically and blah, blah, and it goes fine. But this is like slowing it down big time. All right, as I said, I'm gonna have the infinity set at f11 here, and that's giving me about 10 feet to infinity. All right, so let's do that again. Let's also do one at 1/30th of a second at f16. All right, so before I move too far, I'm going to shoot through this window. We've got some cracked and peeling paint here. We've got a broken window here. There's the pane of glass has got a crack. There's some like dried flowers. It's just sort of a knick-knack store. So I want to get just a corner shot of this. We don't have a whole lot of light here, so let's check it. What are we going to look at if I set it 1/60th of a second? 1/60th of a second at f8. All right, so let's see how far away I need to get. Actually, I don't need to get very far at all, but I am probably 4 feet away from this, so not very far. So at f8, I can get about 4 feet to 5 feet. Let's try it. All right, let's also take one at f11 at 1/30th of a second at f11. Gives me a little bit more wiggle room as far as zone focus. One of the things about this camera is the film counter is on the bottom. And I have this mounted in this really nice case because it's got a neck strap. Otherwise, I don't have a strap. It has a little spot for a wrist strap, but I don't trust that as much as I trust this. So right now I have no idea how many shots we've had. We will know when we run out. All right, let's try something close up. It's bound to not work. This is bound to be a problem. Absolutely. But, all right, 160 at f11. But I am going to be fairly close to this. Get the little welcome sign, and there's some, I'm 3 feet. So at f11, I've got 3 to 4 feet here. Let's do it. Cross our fingers. Let's do 130 at f16, just for the heck of it. 1/30th of a second seems doable with this camera because I mean there's no mirror. It's a leaf shutter. It's small. It might be that small is a bad thing. Harder to keep still. Next possible shot is we've got a birdhouse and then we've got a sculpture behind that says "Love where you live." And we've got this big chair right here behind me, and I don't want that in the shot, so I'm gonna have to get sort of close over here. Want to meter it in the shadows, and let's see what we get. 1/60th of a second at f11 and a half. So let's go with that. I'm going to need that depth of field for this. 11 and a half, 160 at 11 and a half. And I can actually set this aperture in any mid steps. It's continuously variable. So 11 and a half, 1/60th of a second. All right, so let's frame it up. All right, so how far am I? I am 5-6 feet away from the birdhouse probably. All right, so f11, so I'm going to shoot a little past that. So that gives me about 4 feet to a little bit past 6 feet in focus. All right, crossing our fingers here. All right, let's adjust focus just a little bit. Gonna err on the side of distance here. Okay, so I wonder how close I can get. So I'm about 3 feet away, 2.5 feet. Still looking at 11 and a half. 1/60th of a second, 11 and a half. Let's see how this goes. All right. I don't want to get the signage on this old storefront. 1/250th of a second at f16, but I'm gonna have to back up pretty good to get the shot. All right, 1/250 f16. Add an infinity focus here. So if I set the infinity mark at f16, that gives me anywhere between 7 feet and infinity in focus. Which I really don't even need that much. Let's go 1/500 at f11. So what I want to do here is we've got all these windows. So I want to shoot the windows because there's there's character, there's the pitted paint, there's the old paint, there's the chunks that are missing out of the walls, that sort of thing. But when I'm shooting a window, I really need to consider what's on the other side of that window too, or what I'm seeing through that. So if I shoot through this window, I'm looking at a modern building. If I shoot through that window, I'm looking at a modern building. But this corner here, the building behind this is the old stone, and it looks vintage, let's just say that. That's much better for the overall vibe of this shot. So what I want to do, I want to get a horizontal of this larger door, and maybe these two, being able to see what's through there. Now, if I'm here, I'm just going to be able to get the larger door and the smaller window. I think that's going to be fine though. Just need to wait on the sun again because we're getting some interesting shadow through here. Let's measure it in shade first. Let's go 1/120th of a second at f11. All right, so 1/120th of a second at f11, or 1/125th of a second, but this says 120, so that's why I say that. All right, 1/120th of a second at f11. Let's take one before the sun comes back out, if we dare. Okay, now how far am I away from that corner? 25 feet-ish. All right, so if I set the infinity at the f11 mark, that gives me anywhere between about 10 feet to infinity in focus. All right, let's go with that before the sun comes back out. Oh, and that's it. So that is all the film in this one. I wasn't expecting it. I got in a roll and took a bunch of pictures, but that's cool. That was fun. The zone focusing and using the depth of field scale and your distance scale definitely takes some getting used to, and you have to think about this. And you also have to be an okay judge of distance, which I'm not, but we will see how close I was. So that was a fun little shoot though. I have the Tessar version of this as well. I need to get it out sometime and put some film through it. This is the Sonar version, the SE. It's a little higher spec lens. This is a 2.8, it's a 40 millimeter 2.8. The Tessar is not a 2.8, it's a 3.5. So I hope you enjoyed the shoot. Let's get back to the studio, wrap this up.
Okay, so the zone focusing turned out not to be an issue, and I was pleasantly surprised at how much fun this camera is. It's just tiny, and it's definitely that precision camera that Raleigh claimed in its ads. Unfortunately, I had to use the external meter for the shoot, and that made the whole process a bit more involved. But if you get one of these with a working meter, and it's just like not carrying anything at all. Now, here's some other thoughts I had about it. You know, I've got two versions here. One with the 2.8 sonar, that's the one I use for the shoot, and one with the 3.5 Tessar. And normally we might choose the sonar over the Tessar because of the extra half stop of speed. But since this is a zone focusing camera, shooting with the lens at maximum aperture is probably something you'd try to avoid. The shallow depth of field just isn't going to provide much of a zone, and you'll end up guesstimating subject distance on a wing and a prayer. And that's something that I could use more in practice. But there is a reason to choose the sonar over the Tessar, and it doesn't have anything to do with speed. It deals with the lens design and how it's implemented on this camera. With the sonar, and like a lot of lenses, when you focus, you're moving the entire lens assembly in relation to the film plane. So all the elements are moving together. With the Tessar, though, in this design, focusing is achieved just by moving the front element. So the other elements don't move. So you have this instead of this. And here's why that's important. With the sonar design, and since all elements remain in their same relative position, any image corrections built into the lens will be the same, whether you're focused far or near. With the Tessar though, since only the front element moves, any image corrections built in, say when the lens is focused at infinity, are compromised when you change focus. So this makes the Tessar a bit soft in the corners at some specific distances. Now if you stop the lens down to 5.6 or f8, the softness goes away. And with this camera, you're gonna favor smaller apertures anyway and not shoot wide open. So the Tessar versus sonar here might not really be much of an issue or deciding factor. I'll need to take my TE on a shoot to compare it. If I had my crap together, I'd have already done that and included the results right here along with this other one. But me getting my crap together is a tall order. Another thing to consider is that you might want to use a higher speed film than you normally would, because this leads to a wider zone of focus, and having that extra wiggle room is nice. For this shoot, I was shooting ISO 400 in direct sunlight, something I normally wouldn't do, but it gave me more padding in my zones. One final thing I'll mention is that since the very early models of these were made in Germany, you might assume that those would be better than the ones made in Singapore. but from what I've gleaned from web forums is that the quality control at Singapore factory was on par with the Germany plant. So while an early made in Germany model might be a bit more rare, it's not going to be made any better really than the others. So what are your thoughts on the Raleigh 35 series? What did I miss? I'm sure I probably missed something. Be sure to let me know in the comments. Now, what have I got coming up on the channel? Well, y'all voted, and it looks like the Konica 3A won out over the other rangefinders and will be coming up soon. That doesn't mean I won't cover the others, the Canon QL17 and the Kodak Signet 35 and 40. They'll just have to wait their turn. And this is so out of character for me, but I'm really into rangefinders lately. Go figure. I've also been doing a bit of research on the American camera company Argus. That should make an interesting series of a couple of videos. And I've still got the Nikon F3 to cover. I've actually been shooting with it for a month or so because it's just a fantastic camera. But that's coming up, and there's more good stuff too. And before I forget, if you want to submit a photo for the wall here, just send me an email at the address below, and I'll also put it in the description. And another big thanks to Christopher Stinson for this great shot. Kudos. If you want to learn more about zone focusing, I'm putting the link at the end of this video, so check that out. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to hit the like button and share it with all your photographer friends. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe so you won't miss any of that cool stuff that's coming up. To those of you who are subscribed, I really do appreciate the support you give this channel. And I always look forward to hearing what y'all have to say in the comments or in the post section of the channel. I look forward to it because I almost always learn something. And every day I learn something new is a good day. And I'll see y'all next time.